Hi, welcome to the Swedish Tankmuseum. Today we are focusing on this, the armored car Lynx, made in Sweden from 1939. During the mid-1930s, the Danish army ordered from the Swedish company Landsverk 18 of the Lynx armored car. And during 1939, there were 3 that was delivered during the summer, and in September 1939 the Second World War broke out and the Swedish government stopped further delivery. So the Danish army only got 3 of these vehicles before the war broke out. Later the Swedish government decided to confiscate the rest of the 15 that had not been delivered and use them for the Swedish army instead. So these 3 vehicles were not intended for the Swedish army from the beginning, but they became part of the armored car collection that was used for reconnaissance, etc. And they were quite popular. During 1939, Swedish government ordered from Landsverk company another batch of the same armored car. But Landsverk didn't have the capacity since they were already doing tank production. So they went instead to Volvo and asked Volvo, can you provide us the same vehicle so we can deliver to the Swedish army? So Landsverk had a contract with Volvo, and Volvo produced a batch of these armored cars. So this is in fact a Volvo-produced armored car. The Landsverk produced armored cars are not there anymore in Europe. They were sold, 11 of them, to Dominican Republic in 1956, but we will come back to that later. It's a quite interesting vehicle with 2 crew members at the front, the machine gun and the driver on each side. In the turret there is a 20mm automatic gun, coaxial with a machine gun, and at the rear of the vehicle we have another 2 crew members, 1 driver and 1 machine gunner. So the crew of 6, and it's capable of traveling in both directions, equal speed. So you can engage an enemy during reconnaissance patrol and then, like that, swift and go backwards the same speed. This is the door for the forward driver, and you can open up the upper part and you can, to get in easily, you can also open this one, which makes it a bit easier to get in. To see out, the driver has this sort of windshield for normal driving, but there is also periscopes up here, so we can close this hatch for protection and use those periscopes to look out. So the visibility out of the vehicle is quite good compared to many other vehicles from this time. And on the other side there is the machine gun gunner, so they sit side by side. This vehicle was ahead of its time when it saw production in 1939 with individual wheel suspension, 4-wheel drive and 4-wheel steering, which was not that common at the time. Engine mounted in the center on the left side of the vehicle, with ventilation for cooling air. With the engine on the left side of the vehicle, there is this transfer case at the far rear with the gearbox in front of that. So the power comes from the engine through this and into the gearbox, and then from the gearbox it gets out to the different 4 wheels. So it's from technical point of view, quite complicated, but it was quite reliable at the time. So this is the driver's position with the steering wheel in a bit different angle, which if you compare to later vehicles like a ferret armored car, etc., there are a lot of vehicles that actually have the steering wheel in this position, and not that bad. You look out the window, and up here you have the periscope, so quite comfortable when you get here. It's not so easy to get in. Gear shift lever down here for going forward and reverse. The gunner is on the other side with the machine gun, and he has a bit more space. And what is a bit interesting with this vehicle is that down here you have two cranks for protecting the headlights. So you have armor protection on the headlights on the outside that you can do from the inside. Four-wheel steering, four-wheel driving, and quite nice. So this is the rear driver's position, which is a bit more difficult to get into because it's only one door. On the other side there is the engine and the propeller shaft. So this driver's position is quite bad compared to the front driver. And here is the space for the rear machine gun and the machine gunner on the other side. Handle for forward and reverse, and the gear shift for the rear driver. And it's the same with the window and the periscopes up here. I once spoke to a guy that had been a crew member of a Lynx armored car, and he said that the people at the rear, the driver and the gunner, they were quite often seasick because they were going in the wrong direction all the time. So they had to switch positions to have the people that could stand sitting here at the rear, and the people that were a bit more easy to get seasick, they were at the front. And I'm trying to get out. On the side of the driver there is this heat protection because the engine is on the other side. So I can imagine that during summertime it was quite hot to be the driver at the rear because you had the hot engine just behind the wall. Mm. So this is in the turret, and I'm a bit too big for this turret, I think. The gunner's position with the 20mm automatic gun, and the machine gun to the right, which is controlled by the commander. So the commander's position is to the right and the gunner to the left, and behind me there is a big radio. So the turret could traverse all the way around depending on which direction the vehicle was going. I think I like the driver's position better than this one. There were two variants of the Lynx armored car, the M39 produced by Landsverk and M40 produced by Volvo. And the Landsverk produced 11 of them were sold to the Dominican Republic in 1956 when they got out of service from the Swedish army. And some of the Model 40 the Volvo produced, they were actually assigned to the Swedish police as a sort of a riot control vehicle. They used them for several years, but as far as I know, they never used them in reality. They were just training on them. So they didn't have to use them in Sweden. One interesting thing is that the Swedish king, his uncle, Carl Johan Bernadotte, He was at the time of the Second World War cavalry officer and served in these armored vehicles. And by the press, he was called Pansarprinsen, the armored prince. And I think that was some kind of, they wanted to have Swedish heroes to talk about in the press. There were different people they highlighted. So Pansarprinsen was at the time very popular, and he was not that old at the time, so I think it got quite well with the women in the papers at the time. And I met him, and he had a lot of interesting stories to tell about when he were in use of these armored vehicles. So that was the Lynx armored car, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this film, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and there you can find more interesting vehicles.